There we go. Hello and welcome to the Creative Academy. Happy hours, office hours with me. I am Eileen Cook. It is November 6th in our evening edition. And we're going to jump in and talk about a particular topic that I have an interest in discussing. And of course, if anyone has any questions, we will of course tackle those as well. But I wanted to talk a little bit about coincidence. And I am curious if anyone has any thoughts about whether or not you can have coincidence in your story. Bunny, any thoughts?
You can have a coincidence as your inciting incident, but after that, people kind of feel like it's, hey, it came out of nowhere, and gee, the character didn't do a whole lot to get out of that thing. So I guess it might also depend on the coincidences. Certainly, books start with coincidences, otherwise we wouldn't have the story.
Yes.
The girl, if she doesn't meet the guy in the coffee shop after 2 years, then
then you got yourself no book. Exactly. So you'll sometimes hear the rule of thumb is that you can have a coincidence that gets your character into trouble, but you cannot have a coincidence that gets your character out of trouble. And I will butcher the pronunciation of this, but in terms of Greek theater and so forth, it was machina, which is the idea that the gods would solve things for you, which is frowned upon. And also very unlikely if you ask me. But that is the idea that they would do these incredible situations, and these characters would be in these horrible, horrible situations. And then literally they would have a cart that would come down from the top of the theater, like, and be like, hey, I'm Zeus. And lucky for you, today only I'm going to solve this problem for you. And apparently, early Greeks thought that was awesome. It worked for them. Doesn't work so well anymore. So coincidence will oftentimes be something where you just don't want to have it in your story. Although you do, sometimes you'll also hear the idea that you get one coincidence. So when do you want to use it? I've had some people, in fact, Joelle Anthony, who does a lot of beta reads for me, will argue that you shouldn't have any coincidence. That even characters who are, for example, as you're saying, Bonnie, meeting in a coffee shop, that there is still a really good reason why everyone is there on that day, and that it's less of just, oh my God, what are you doing here? And more of, something that was destined to happen or was going to happen. Sometimes you need a coincidence to sort of get the plot moving, but the more sometimes that you have it just as a convenience, it's actually, for lack of a better term, a cheat. So you're looking to sort of avoid having those if you can. What can sometimes be nice is something that might feel like a coincidence, but later the reader is going to realize that they weren't at all. So if you read like Leanne Moriarty does a lot of that in her things like Little Big Lies, there's quite a few things where when you're reading it, you think, oh, that's just a total happenstance. And then as the book unfolds, you realize, no, in fact, it is not chance at all. So sometimes it is that idea where it's almost like a mystery. So you put something out and it's like, oh, what are the odds that I would stumble across this particular clue? And then later you're going to realize you did not stumble across that clue. That clue was placed there to misdirect you or to lead you in a different location. So sometimes you can get away with, for lack of a better term, a fake coincidence. I also think one of the things that happens that can sometimes drive someone away from your book is if your coincidence is just all around too large. So you've picked something that is truly that kind of almost impossible to believe. Like, what are the odds of that? Like, not only did I run into someone at the coffee shop who used to be my ex-boyfriend from college, but he's also about to become my brand new boss at the company that I'm starting at. And by the way, he's also married to the person that, like, where it suddenly starts to be like, okay, I could maybe buy that the college boyfriend you ran into at the coffee shop. Or I could maybe buy that your college boyfriend who you haven't talked to in years is your boss. But that all of those things happened at the same time in some kind of weird convergence of things.
Isn't there also kind of everybody's somehow related to everybody else. Coincidence
Yes.
that is similar to that.
Where it just feels, yeah, it feels like a cheat. And it feels like you're asking the reader to just so far stretch what is believable. Which isn't to say, whenever I've given this advice, someone always is, because it's often I'm giving it in a manuscript, and someone will say, but that actually happened to me, right? Reality is not actually an excuse for writing. I know it seems like it should be, and you should be able to say, but that happened to me, or I had that exact same experience. But you don't get to say that in a novel because you'd have to have a footnote that went to the very back of the book that was like, before you put this book down and discuss, be aware this actually happened to the author. It just stretches. And in fact, I think sometimes it's what throws someone out. If people remember the James Frey incidents where he wrote the book, was it A Million Little Pieces, that was picked up by Oprah. And it was, in theory, a memoir. So it's a memoir about this fellow going through addiction. And she picked it at her. And when I picked it up, I started reading it and I was like, I just don't believe these things. Like they just seemed too over the top. And I'm just going to go on the record that while Oprah believed him, I did not. And then it turned out later he was a big fat liar, liar, pants on fire, which is why Oprah should put all of her books through me before making a decision. And we'll see if she does that going forward. But for me, it was the fact that there were a few things that I bought early in the book, but the more that it went on. So for example, one of the scenes is he talks about he's in a rehab center and he has massive dental issues and he goes to have dental work done and they won't give him anything for the pain because he's an addict. So they're drilling his teeth with nothing. So first off, that for me, like Novocaine is not an addictive substance. You don't see people who are homeless on the downtown east side wandering around drooling on themselves because they just had to have one more hit of Novocaine. Novocaine doesn't get you high. It may be something that the pain drugs a dentist may choose not to give you because you have a history of addiction, but they certainly wouldn't be unwilling to freeze your mouth. So that was one. There was another where he actually is getting on the plane to go to the rehab center and he's vomited on himself. He's unconscious. And people basically put him on the plane so that he will have to go to the recovery center. And yeah, no, I'm not buying that either because I've been on planes. And if you're like basically at all disruptive, they're not going to let you on. And certainly, United Airlines isn't going to be like, yeah, sure, you can carry that guy on and then just leave him there unconscious and intoxicated. I'm sure he'll be great 30,000 feet up in the air. So there was these things that were just sort of stretching that I think he was looking for these really high drama moments. That for me fell flat because I couldn't buy that amount of drama. For me, it just seemed too quick. If you have to ask yourself if it's believable, it probably isn't. So that is something to sort of keep in mind. Another thing where I see a lot is where coincidence is used as a way of getting in an info dump. And by this, I mean that I just happen to be in the bathroom in a stall when two people are having this really important discussion that I just happen to hear because I'm in the bathroom at exactly the same time they are, and they just happen to be talking about exactly some piece of information that I need to know, either as the character or the reader needs to know it. Again, is that stretching believability? Maybe, maybe not, but I do think it feels a bit like a cheat. And so, out of all the things, that I happen to pick up, I pick up a note that just happens to have this piece of information and a hidden map on the back. Again, if you're going to do that, almost having it feel like something rather than not. If you are going to have several coincidences in your book, kind of vary them a little bit. So that they're not always a chance meeting, that they're not always the exact same again, with an overheard conversation. And I'll see that sometimes in early drafts of mystery novels where the detective continues to find clues over and over again by chance. Not only does that feel like a cheat, I think the other challenge with that kind of coincidence is you're not really giving your character a lot of agency. So by agency, what I mean is that your character is driving the book. So if you have a detective who just keeps sort of stumbling into these amazing clues, not really that great of a detective. Now, if the detective, did you like roll in tuna, Bonnie? Or your cat is like, I love you so much.
She just wants attention, and if I ignore her, that's what she does.
I just wondered if maybe, like, you just
Animals.
rubbed a tuna on your sweater before you had off, which is fine. Like, do whatever makes you happy.
Love it.
But I'm enjoying it. It's kind of nice.
Actually, I had an issue with those overheard conversations. There we go.
Yeah. What's that word? There you go.
Was popping in my head, getting in the way. and because of, I kept hearing that rule, and I would try to write something, and it's like, no, it can't be an overheard conversation. But there happened to be 2 instances in one of my novels that I just could not figure out another way for the character to get the information. So I hoped it wasn't a cheat, but I tried to make it totally like there was a reason for them to be there. There was a reason for them for the other people to have thought that they weren't being overheard. But I do admit that, especially when you're writing that first draft, it's a struggle to come up with different ways for your characters to get information that they might need, or that the reader might need.
And I mean, here's one thing that I would say is, and it's quite funny because I did a school talk today. So I was at one of the schools and we were talking, they're working on a short story unit. So they're all busily crafting their stories. And they're at that point, and I was going to say age, but I don't think it's an age thing. I think we all do it at certain points where you come to a point that you don't know how to handle something. And so you back away from the manuscript altogether. So you're like, oh, I don't want this to be a chance meeting, so I'm going to do something completely different, and I don't know what that thing is, so I'm not going to write anything at all. So when in doubt, I would have an overheard conversation, and then for me, it's a case of going back later and being like, is there something else? Is there another way for this information to come out? And if there isn't, then is there a way, as you're talking about, to have a reason why these characters, that it's not just like, what are the odds? I was, walking down the street and I just happened to overhear the people in front of me having a conversation that just happened to be at the exact same moment that I was passing them, that just happened to have a piece of information. So, I mean, it's certainly much more believable if I overhear a conversation from one of my coworkers where I'm like, I'm headed out to lunch, and then I duck back into my cubicle to grab something and I overhear her talking about me to someone else. That's a much more believable thing where she thought I had left. She probably wouldn't have had the conversation if she knew I was there. I've already established that I often forget things. And so I've dashed back to my cubicle and now that's happened. That's, for me as a reader, is not something that's likely to frustrate me. So one question is, can you use coincidence like as a dramatic thing? So the example being, I'm on my way to a job interview. Someone steals a spot in front of me. And I yell a bunch of insults at that person, asshole, blah, blah, blah. And of course, that's exactly the person that I have the interview with. I think you can get away with it, but it is a little bit of a cheat. Like, you are raising the stakes just slightly. So one thing I would want to establish is, one, that I was frantic to get there, so I was running late, and or that I'm the kind of person who swears and yells insults at people in general, which bracket I'm not. But something that would establish where it's like, this is not an unusual. So maybe there's a scene earlier where I go off on a waiter for something else, and then you see this happen again, and it's like, oh, this is a pattern of behavior for this character. They react to something. If you have it a lot, I still think the reader will bump. They'll still have a bit of a feeling of, this is the second or third, not that they're counting or keeping a tally, but they'll have a sense that, like, you are the most unlucky person, because that's what it is, right? It's that unlucky moment where you've done something, and of course that turns out to be your blind date or the person who's doing the interview. Most of the time you don't have that situation. So if you are going to have it, just know that you are slightly bending the rules just a tiny bit.
Aren't there entire comedic rom-coms based on that?
Oh yeah. And again, like anyone who knows me knows that I'm not a big fan of saying rules. Like, well, you can't have coincidence. You can't do it. Of course you can, and people do it, and sometimes it works. And I think there are certain stories which lend themselves more often to coincidence. And again, we've been talking about mystery, but that is another one where quite often there is a series of events that are unlikely that either lead to the crime being happened. Like, I never would have killed someone except so-and-so came in at just a time when I was doing something and I reacted, and that's why this murder happened. Those kinds of things. Again, sometimes if you can later make something feel like it was a coincidence, but later we realize, no, someone deliberately did want that situation to come up, or they planted that clue to be there, or that person had some reason to suspect you were up to something. So they actually, like, it wasn't just chance that they came across you committing the crime. They had some reason to be there. Will sometimes work it up. I will say, and again, I still won't say never ever, but I will put a big thing of, if there's one place not to have a coincidence, it's at the climax of your novel. Whether that's one that solves your character's main problems or just makes everything 100% worse, but is unbelievable, that's just so much of a stretch. It just think for me, it throws it out. And it makes me, I think what it does is it makes me aware that I'm reading fiction. So for me, I would definitely try, if you can, avoid it at climax, and really, really, really try and avoid it at climax to get your character out of the situation. Like, all hope is lost, but then suddenly and unexpectedly, the bus, which was late, had suddenly now had time and suddenly showed up and was just at the place where I could then take the bus and get away from everything. So that becomes a situation where I would possibly take that coincidence out. Sometimes
that one actually seems to happen a lot more than I'd expect, because it takes away the whole agency for the main character, but it does happen a lot in fantasy.
Yeah. So Lisa, welcome and nice to see you. We're talking about coincidence, and when is it okay to have a coincidence, and when is it, and I hate to use the word wrong, but maybe possibly going to bump your reader out of the story. And I
get to guess.
Whoops.
It's when Lisa pops in the room.
Yeah. What are the odds that Lisa would be here?
Yeah, totally. Oh, wow.
So yeah, we definitely are looking to kind of cut those out. The other thing is, I think sometimes coincidences happen because a lot of times in a manuscript, we realize that we could combine some characters. So you have a police officer in one scene, and then later they may
Did she go silent on your end too?
Yeah, she's frozen and silent, so. Eileen!
Yeah, her internet just died.
It must have.
Yep.
Well, at least it's not a funny face.
So has she talked about using it for only using it when it makes things absolutely totally worse?
No, she hasn't yet.
I figured you can get away with it. If it makes it really, really bad, maybe.
Maybe. And only then. Oh,
Yeah.
We're having a conversation without you.
Yeah,
You're muted.
carrying on without you.
You're muted. You're muted.
there we go.
Eileen, you muted. There you go.
Not anymore. That was exciting. Okay.
We had a little conversation without you.
And what was this? Coincidentally, what did I miss while I was booted off the system?
Oh, I just asked if you said if I'd missed you saying that the only time you may possibly be able to get away with a coincidence is if it makes things really bad for your character. and only then possibly.
I mean, definitely that's going to be helpful. And I think, again, earlier is often better than later. Where, again, you know, as Bonnie was saying at the start, like oftentimes it's a coincidence that starts the book in general. Like this thing just happens to, you know, the asteroid is hit by another asteroid and now it's on a collision course for Earth and we have to do something about it. I, you know, am the queen of magical unicorns and I don't know it until I'm hit by a car. And when I go to the hospital, they find out I have rainbow sparkle blood, right? So that's, you know, like, what are the odds of that? Like, and that becomes the thing that then kicks off the story where they want to lock me up and I have to run away and do something else because of that. So sort of thinking around that is really particularly helpful. But if you are stuck, put the coincidence in, keep writing, figure it out later. I am becoming more and more convinced that too often we're stopping ourselves and we're getting stuck and we are not finishing. As I was talking about this morning when I was reading that book on sort of increasing your word count, a big part of it, I think, is I tend to think that I'm not bad with an internal editor. I think that I turn it off, but I think maybe not as much as I think that I do. Because I will pause and I'll be like, that's not quite right. And I'll spend sometimes a fair bit of time dithering. Whereas I think if I just pushed forward, it would work much better. Again, when I was talking before, I decided to leave the meeting for absolutely no reason at all, is the idea of combining characters. I do think you can get away with it, again, as long as you're not stretching the believability. So I run into a cop who gives me a ticket, and then that night when I meet my boyfriend's family, it turns out that mom is the cop. Okay, maybe, but oh, I was out of town and 30 miles out of town, and that was the place I got pulled over. And that, like, just with every single, like, the fact I was in my own town and he was a cop is a coincidence. The fact I was out of town and that's his mom and she travels long distance for a commute. And by the way, you know, one more thing that just kind of gets added in, the more and more it just strains the reader. And I think what the problem is that throws them out of the story. And I think we're always looking for what is that thing that makes you go, wait, that doesn't seem right. And so when possible, get rid of coincidences. So that is what I wanted to chat about this evening, was the power of coincidence and how to avoid it. But I wanted to also check in and see how everyone is doing with their various projects. So I'll start with you, Bonnie. How goes everything? I know you've sent me pages, which I haven't yet looked at, but I'm going to.
Yeah, I sent you pages, and I had actually written 4 chapters further along, but because I changed one secondary character's motivation, after I sent you pages, I now have to go edit those other pages.
You're welcome.
It turns out that I was able to smush 2 chapters into one, and the rest are gone because they just don't work at all. So now I get to write new words, which I love. So
you're happy as all. See, look, I made your life miserable and it worked.
Yeah, I can finally make progress for NaNoWriMo, because editing winds up being 192 words because you deleted this chapter, you added a chapter, and guess what?
And that's where I think, depending on how you feel about Nano, like I do know that some people get caught in the feeling of like, they must win. And it's again, you do get a certificate suitable for framing or whatever, but really if it means that much to you, I'll make you a certificate. If that's, that it's more important, like sometimes to be like, I want to make progress. And that might mean writing 50,000 new words. It might mean editing and cutting 30,000 words. It might mean some mix of those two things.
That's why whenever anyone asks me if I win one, I say I won every single time, because I accomplished my goals of making progress. Yes. All I wanted to do, so.
And that's where I think sometimes, and I get why they make it a word count, because I think that is just a very tangible and easy thing to point to. But I also think it's interesting to sort of set an ass and seat goal. So in terms of, I want to spend at least 20 minutes a day on a writing project. And that might be writing new words, that might be, or X amount of time per week. And so again, I think the power of nano really comes from the idea that you're setting yourself down and focusing on writing and trying to get in the habit of writing is the more important thing, versus feeling that you need to get a set word count or any of those things done. But I'm excited for new pages and to see what's happening in the world of dragons. Lisa, catch us up. Where are you with your various writing projects and things?
I get the gum out of my mouth first before I started talking, blah, 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 you know. Anyway, I had a bit of a anxiety this morning because for the first time, like I'm not usually an anxiety person, but this whole nano thing, I'm one of those, I want to get 50,000 words written just so I can edit them. I can edit them later. So I've started a new story, brand new. A friend of mine, the one who I helped him get he had an idea for a book. Like I told him, he had a book. Remember the one I helped publish and get out? His very first book proposal, and he gets an offer. So I'm thinking this guy has a horseshoes up his ass. So if he has an idea, I think I'm going to follow it. And it was the first time I've ever, as a writer, like taken someone else's idea. Like they gave it to me, and I went, okay, I'm going to try this. And I'm having a blast writing it. So that's going okay, so far. I think I know where I'm going with it. The other one that I was working on in the morning sprints, I'm sort of putting it on pause right now at about 20,000 words. And then I just got my edits back for my manuscript that I was submitting to agents, and she's got a lot of repairs she's suggesting. So
I heard exhaustion in your voice there.
Yeah. I'm like, I think I'm gonna just focus on the new thing that's fun, the shiny new thing right now.
Yeah.
And I'm letting the feedback she gave me, some of it I agree with, some of it I don't. And it was like that the last time too. She's a little too picky for my taste. And that's okay. I mean, she has her own way that she sees it to go, and I think that's great, but I don't agree with it, some things. So I'm making a list of what I agree with and what I don't agree with, and what I can do and what I won't do, and just sort of organizing it and then sitting with it for a while.
I think that's probably the biggest take home right there is the sitting with it. When I have an automatic knee-jerk response to feedback, I always need to sit with it to figure out, is that knee-jerk response like it truly is wrong for my story and I instinctively know it as soon as I hear that feedback? Or is it actually valuable feedback that I have an instinctive like no response because I can envision what hell it's going to be to actually make those changes? So it can be either one for me. Like sometimes it's like I have that immediate like no, and it's more around the fact that I'm just like slightly at some level horrified about what that would mean. But the longer I sit with it, the more I start to have that feeling of like, shit, they're right.
I thought about that, and some of them, the ones that I found that I had the biggest knee-jerk reactions to were things where it seems like she completely misunderstood where I was going, like what was going on. So I went, I think there must be a problem, but it's not like she totally misinterpreted something. So I'm like, I need to clarify the interpretation. I don't need to make the change that she's saying, that kind of thing. Yeah.
And I think when I'm rejecting a piece of feedback, that comes from one of two places. One, and you'll see this happens a lot, is oftentimes who we're asking for feedback is other writers, because one, we know them, they tend to be our friends. And two, they're suckers for sometimes being willing to read what we wrote, where we sometimes don't feel the need to subject others to that. But the problem with having someone read your work who is a writer is I think it is almost impossible for us not to default to, what I would do.
She's a professional editor, which I think is really interesting. Yeah.
I think it is impossible in the same way that I think it is impossible. And I recognize it in myself when I edit things. I have personal likes and dislikes. And it's very hard for me if I see something and it's in something that I don't care for, separating out, is it wrong? In brackets, or is it I don't like it, which is a different thing. So again, that's a skill as an editor to try and be like, this may just be me, but insert thing. But I do think oftentimes when other writers are reading our work, they're inserting, you know, what would be so fun is if we got chapters from this person's point of view.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because I love that character and I want to spend time with that character. Not that that's the story that you're writing. So sometimes it's a knee-jerk reaction around you recognize, like, nope, they're taking the story in a different direction that is not the story that I'm telling.
Yeah.
But I think you raised a really valuable point as well, which is sometimes what they're raising is a problem. So they're coming up with a solution or a direction, or they have misunderstood something, as you said, because maybe something wasn't clear. So they've gone off in another direction. And then you don't need to take their solution. You just need to figure out where they went awry. And can you make that little thing, in fact, more clear? And that will make a big, big difference.
Thank you. Well, I think overall, I'm just happy to be writing something else, because after this, spending 3 years on one book, I just do not want to put all my eggs in one basket ever again. You know?
And I think it's difficult. One of the things that I struggle with is I'm very bad at splitting attention. So sometimes I'm trying, like if I'm working on one book and that book happens to take 3 years, it's really hard for me to be like, and I'm also working on this other project at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I can sometimes be outlining something if I'm revising something else, like if I'm at really different story points. But if I'm still drafting, it's very hard for me. I'm a very monogamous writer. Once I'm with one character, I want to stay with that character until that story is complete. But it can be a challenge, as you say, when you spend a lot of time on a project, and then that project may or may not go anywhere, depending on things that have nothing to do with the story, and can be market issues or, you know, people taking forever to get back on queries, where you feel like, I wish I had something else on the go. So that's always a special treat, and something to keep in mind. I think Yuki is at a place where she can't speak, so I am not going to force her. Although if you would like to weigh in, Yuki, just send me a message and I will definitely make that happen. But we can certainly do that. In terms of other projects, anyone have any questions? Bonnie.
I'm having a problem with querying. The problem is I've sent down 50. There's still, I don't know, 14 in the universe. There's some fulls in the universe, there's some partials in the universe, and there's queries in the universe. And I don't know, I hit a roadblock and I can't seem to send out any more. And I know that it's a matter of numbers and I need to send them out, but I can't seem to get past this. And I plan every week, okay, on Saturday I will send out 3. And Monday rolls around and I have completely forgotten. And it's like this little mental block that's gone through my head, and I can't seem to get past it so that I can actually send this out. I don't know what to do about it. It's very frustrating.
So let me be your counselor for a minute. Because I happen to have some skill in this area.
Do you? Oh,
I do. I happen to have done
that.
No, what a coincidence.
I'm not really in crisis, though.
It's okay. You don't have to be in crisis to see a counselor. But certainly one of the questions is when someone is, and it's the same thing with our character. It's the Don Moss question, right? So if you have a character who says, it is my goal to do X, and they're not doing X, the first thing is there a lack of is it that they don't know how to do X?
Well, I've already done X before, so
I think we can eliminate that. It is not a lack of information or knowledge. So then my question is, what is going on in your noggin around that particular thing? And it could be anything from, I don't want to set out another big batch because then I'm afraid if that batch doesn't go well, that might mean that the story isn't going anywhere. And I don't want to deal with that. So if I don't send out queries, I never have to deal with the fact.
Just avoid everything, right?
I might just avoid it. So that can be it. It can sometimes be around like, I want to make sure this next batch is the one that has the winner. So I need to take time. So like, have you identified who you want to query?
Well, I actually feel like I've sent it to all the winners. And now
Yeah.
I'm going through the C list. And nobody's really a great match. They like young adults, any
Yeah.
genre. So I feel like I've already hit everyone that specifically said they wanted science fiction, specifically said they wanted near future or colonization or things that take place on Earth as opposed to aliens. So now I'm going to more generic. Um, I can't say agents, but agent wish lists that are more generic. And I'm finding that harder to feel like it's worth the effort, maybe, because it takes a long time to research each agent, and I can't come up with any reason why I'm querying them. I'm querying you because you like young adults.
Well, and here's one thing. You actually don't have to put that into the query. Like if they do have a reason, so if it is something like they've had on manuscript wish list, like I am looking for, and then they describe your exact book, where you're like, what coincidence, I am doing that. Then that will work. But if they're not doing that, you don't have to put in like, I'm querying you because of, you said you like young adult. You can just go into the query. But when I hear you talking, that makes me think if that in fact is the blog or the block, which is when you had identified agents that you were like, these are the people who, in my mind, and we are always 4 steps ahead in our fantasy life, right? So we like, especially if there's a picture or any of that kind of thing. So we're like, oh, it's going to be this person and they're going to read it. And, they rep so-and-so and they're going to read mine and they're going to love it. And we're like all the way down to like how it's going to be when you have Christmas together and all that kind of stuff. And when it's less specific, when it feels like I'm just throwing it out to the universe, it may be harder to get excited about it. Yeah. So that may be a big part of it. So sometimes just knowing what's blocking us is what can make the difference to getting over the block, which is I just need to start getting excited because I believe it is a numbers game. So these are people who like YA and I don't know what their tastes are. So I'm going to put it out there and I'm going to see what happens and see where it goes and see what I can't do. And then breaking things into manageable steps. So like you've already talked that you've done that, but maybe it needs to be even more manageable around like, I'm going to create a list if you haven't. If I have the list, then I'm going to put it, like you say on Monday, it doesn't get done. Is it on your to-do list?
Well, because right now it's to research agents to add to the list. But I kind of almost feeling like maybe I don't need to do a lot of research. Just go through all the YA agents and start sending. Because I've already narrowed them down. So.
If you've narrowed it down and feel like I've nailed the people that I, can easily obtain that they are the person looking for my kind of book, then yeah, I would be like, obviously you want to research into the sense that they're not someone who I specialize in erotica novels. And you're like, hey, would you like to see my YA fantasy? That probably is not,
failure. I have no desire to do that.
So, don't do that. But if you've narrowed it down, like, yep, they like YA, you have a YA novel, you're going to send it off. So breaking it into smaller bits. Have you also heard the term to eat the frog?
No.
I'm trying to remember where it comes from.
I don't want to eat a frog.
Yeah, well, that's basically it, which is the idea is if you have something unpleasant to do that first. So I don't know. I have one of those weird hangups that I have is I don't like calling people I don't know. I don't know why, like, and I'm not talking like random strangers. I'm talking like the furnace repair guy, like where I will put that off and I'll be like, oh, I didn't call him. Look at that. It's already 5. He's gone home for the day. I'll just do it tomorrow. It's just a weird thing.
I can relate to that.
Yeah. I have my own weird things.
They can email me or I can send in a little form thing.
Oh, I love when they have the email form. That makes me so happy. I can't even tell you.
Much better than conversation.
The idea of eat the frog is if you know there is something that you are putting off, that you do it first with the idea of then it's down and then you've swallowed it and you can move on. And that the longer you put off eating the unpleasant thing, which is, of course, French people everywhere are like, but I love frog. Yeah. is the idea that then it's done. And what you will find is you will often free up your productivity in all other sorts of areas, because we will drag ourselves through something like, I'm going to research those agents, and we open it up. Oh, phone call. Now I'm going to research those agents. Like, oh, email. Oh, clip came in. Oh, and we're not necessarily even doing anything else. It's not like we're saying, I need to research agents, but I don't want to, so I'm going to focus in on this other thing. We tend to drift because we know that's the thing we should be doing. So I will oftentimes look at my list for the next day, and if there's something on it that's a frog item, I try and do it first. Or even also breaking things down. So saying researching agents is kind of vague. So it's a little vague.
Take me an hour for each agent, because I do query tracker, I do marketplace, I do publishers weekly, I do manuscript wish list, and I do their Twitter feed and their website. An hour later, I go, no. Okay, next agent.
Yeah. So you might just narrow that down a little bit, like saying, Query Tracker is a great place to go. If people like Absolute Writer, that's another forums where people are often talking about agents. So that might be a place to sort of go. But here's the thing. And if you guys tell agents that I said this, I'm totally going to deny it, even though I'm recording it as we speak, and there will be proof of it.
Just go beep.
Yeah, we'll just block this out later. But I think quite often we spend so much time digging deep and trying to figure this stuff out. But you know what? I don't know if we send it to the wrong agent, what are they going to do? Reject us? Oh, well, some of them have rejected us anyway. Again, I do try and avoid, again, sending to the person who's looking for erotica novels, or the person who says no more YA fan. I do try and do that. But honestly, if they're not updating their agency website where that is, why is it my responsibility to look on 4 different, their Twitter feed, their Facebook feed, see what they have here, see what they have there?
Yeah.
No.
Digest interviews there.
Yeah, or it can be the kind of thing of, you know what, I'm going to make a list of 10 people, and then I'll spend 15 minutes on, or 10 minutes on each of them, and that's it. And as long as I'm not getting a red flag that they completely do something different, then screw it and just send it.
Yeah.
Again, the worst thing that's going to happen, and it's one of the most freeing things, is a no is just a no, and it was going to be a no anyway. It's not like they're going to be like, how dare you darken my inbox with this abomination of a query? You have a professional, well-done query. If it's not what they're looking for, well, then they should put a better thing on their agency website about what they are looking for.
Yeah, and not be so generic, right?
Yeah, if you're going to be generic, and I think sometimes they're generic, and I do know some agents do that because they don't know what they want. And they don't want to say to someone I'm looking for YA sci-fi in the near future with a protagonist who's not older than 17, because then they're afraid they're missing out on someone's YA fantasy that is completely different.
Right.
And Lisa's making paper airplanes.
Yeah. The other source that I actually, because I thought, well, there was an actionable thing I can do, because I got the Writer's Digest Market book for young adults, and I can just start going through alphabetically and target those ones, because they've already done the work for me by curating who does young adults. So. And
Anna, everyone knows my feelings about querying is it's hell, and it sucks. And part of it is because you don't someone can have on manuscript wish list something, but then something happens and you have no way of knowing they just broke up with their boyfriend named Kevin, and you have a character named Kevin. So they're going to reject your book because they hate anyone named Kevin. So there's sort of no point in that. So I did get a question that came in, so I'm going to sneak it in here. So someone was talking about they're revising and trying to keep going to make their character more interesting, and their self-editor is getting in the way a little bit of that, and it can be discouraging when they spend an entire day writing and then they realize that none of it is usable. So first off, I feel your pain. Been there, done that, have done it multiple times. So one question I think to ask yourself at some point, which is a very hard question to answer, which is, are you just rearranging deck chairs, or rearranging the furniture is the other term that sometimes is used, which is you're not really making any significant changes, but you're like, maybe their hair should be red. Yeah, no, I'm going to make their hair red. And so like you go through and you make the changes to make their hair red, and where you're trying to kind of come up with something where maybe there's nothing wrong with what you have. I do think it's interesting, the question about, is my character interesting enough? Because that is the age-old thing of, well, what makes someone interesting? And I actually did an exercise with a bunch of high school students once, because we were talking about making interesting characters. And I asked them to talk about people in their life that they find interesting, whether that is someone that they know personally, and then also to make a couple people that is someone that they find interesting who might be a historical figure who's dead, or a pop star, or that kind of thing. So when they had at least 2 people that they know personally that they find interesting, and then 2 people that they don't know personally that they find interesting, and then talk about what makes that person interesting to them. And I think it's one of those questions we don't often ask ourselves about, what is it that I find intriguing about that person? And then kind of going and being like, when we're trying to make our character interesting to readers in general, I think that's really hard, because who's the reader in general? But if you say, if I am writing a book for teen readers, because YA is my primary audience, so I know adults are reading my books, but I know that teens are the biggest readers, I will try and picture, what is that person like? And I actually have in my own mind, like what her room looks like, what kind of posters she has on the wall, what she does for recreational hobbies. She's a very clear person in my mind, my imaginary perfect reader. And then I think about, what does she find interesting? And what will pull her along? And that might be something that I look to stick into the story. The other thing that I might think about, what makes people interesting, which is that there is a little bit of depth, which is the idea that when you see them or meet them the first time, you aren't getting absolutely all the information. So characters don't always say and think exactly what they say and think, right? Like, I, like this person, I don't like this person. That maybe sometimes they're saying that they like someone, but there's something about their behavior that makes me go, that doesn't seem right. So the line of dialogue that I sometimes use as an example is, Brian asked me if I'd like to have dinner. I'd love to have dinner with you, Brian, I said, twisting the rings on my finger. So as soon as I say that, the reader goes, now she just said that she really wanted to have dinner with Brian. And yet there's something about the fact that she's twisting the rings on her finger that makes me wonder if she's anxious about that. So is she anxious because she's really interested, or anxious because she does not want to have dinner? And they'll be then looking for other clues to fill out what's going on. Because keep in mind, I, as the character, and I, as an actual real person, may not know what it is that I want. So it's that kind of thing. I was having a discussion with a friend today, and we were talking about, have you ever gone out on a date with someone that you didn't like? And the answer was yes. And then why did you go on that date? And sometimes it's like, well, I don't want to be mean, or maybe I'm missing something, or it was nice that he said I was pretty, or I want a free dinner and I don't want to admit that really, those of us who are in grad school, I said a lot of yeses to dinner dates because I was on a tight budget. So if someone's buying dinner, that definitely made them a more appealing possible contact than someone who wasn't. Would I have wanted to admit that to myself? Probably not. But did I maybe have a broader idea of who was interesting because I was hungry? Probably. So I think if you're trying to make your character interesting, another, really good thing is what's going for them on the surface. So what are they saying, doing in the book? And then what's maybe happening at a subtext level, which is either something that they think or feel that they don't feel comfortable sharing with other characters, and or something that they themselves may not even be willing to admit. So, I don't, the age old thing of, I don't want to have a fight with this person, so I'm going to bury how I feel about this. And I'm going to say, like, it doesn't really bother me. You know what? She's always late. It doesn't bother me if I get to a restaurant, it takes her 20 minutes or whatever. And what it really is I feel like if I called her on it, she wouldn't want to maybe be my friend. Or I feel like if I called her on it, it's highlighting that I'm anally retentive and must show up for places early all the stinking time. So that is something that maybe I'm not willing to face and deal with, but that's really what's going on. And I think the reader does sometimes enjoy that the character is saying and doing X, but I think there's something else, and they're wanting to read for that. And that's really my theory, that all books to some degree are a little bit of a mystery. All right.
It's that good old push and pull.
I love me some push and pull. We're either pushed to something or pulled to it. So which one's it gonna be? All right. So if we have no other questions, give people a chance. My only last question is, I am thinking of dividing up my office hours and moving the morning office hours off of Tuesday. And I'm curious if people have any thoughts. I will also put it into GLIP to see if people have thoughts on that. But I'm thinking doing it Tuesday morning and then Tuesday night is probably maybe less than ideal. So I'm just curious to hear from others if they have a thought.
Do you have a preference on the morning, or?
No, I'm actually open if people have some thoughts on that. Like, whatever you do, don't pick whatever day. I don't think currently we have anything on Thursdays. So my thought was maybe doing a Thursday.
We have the commitment group with Donna on Thursdays for NaNoWriMo at 10, but we don't have anything at 9 in the morning on Thursdays.
I could do it.
Wednesdays are excellent for me because I don't have to go to work in the office on Wednesdays generally, so that's my preference.
And I can make Thursdays. It's just one Thursday a month I can't.
Fair enough. How about Wednesdays for you, Bonnie?
Wednesdays are always good.
Well, we might just have this is what happens when you show up for office hours. Your vote counts for more.
And Fridays are good too. And Mondays and Tuesdays. But Mondays are Crystal's days. So.
Monday, yeah, Crystal has office hours at 9. So that, and I do know some people can only make evenings, so I definitely want to have a morning and an evening. Mm-hmm. But I think I
notice more people come to Crystal's 7 o'clock one than 3 or 5 o'clock. But.
Yeah, my challenge is I teach at SFU on Tuesday nights, and I am somewhat reluctant to block off 2 nights a week where I know I absolutely can't get anything else in because of other commitments. So I'm thinking I might still leave towards the 5 on the Tuesday night, but I may be shifting to a Wednesday.
Fine. How are we seeking?
There you go. Bonnie's like, I'm in. I'm just in all the time. And as always, they are recorded, so people can always download them. And I do also make sure for people, if you ever have a question, you can always email me that question either in GLIP or on my email, and I will tackle it and record it as an office hours, and then we can go from there. All right. So I will talk to everyone later. I think you guys were in the morning, but just in case, I think most people know I do have surgery coming up on Thursday, so I may be a little out of the academy. So if you send me a question in the next couple of days, it's possible you may not hear from me. I didn't drop off the planet. I'm just high as a kite. So I will get back to you when I am back, but I will be back on Tuesday next week. Donna's got the morning because I have an appointment, but I will be in the evening one. So we will go from there.
Sounds good.
I will take all the luck I can. I have absolutely no control over any of it, but I'm going to do my part. So I will be there with positive thoughts.
Here's to a successful surgery.
To a successful surgery. Thank you, everybody, and have a good night. I'm going to stop recording.